I want to introduce you to our two speakers. Sandy Pattison is a community educator and prevention specialist for the Bay Area. She earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in American Studies and Spanish Literature from Occidental College, where she began her work in violence prevention as a peer educator for the college's Sexual and Intimate Partner Violence Prevention and Intervention Office. Since then, Sandy has worked for a variety of organizations dedicated to empowering marginalized folks and creating communities free from violence. As youth program coordinator at Jenesse Center, she manages the organization's partnership in educational healing and advocacy-related programs with local colleges and universities. She also works with younger students creating and facilitating trauma-informed programs for local middle and high schools. Her personal mission is to work towards ending all forms of power-based harm through education, advocacy, and fostering interpersonal understanding and connection. And then our second speaker is Natalia Chavez. She's a youth program advocate for Jenesse Center's Generation J youth program. She received her BA in Gender and Sexuality Studies from the University of California, Riverside. She brings a passion for prevention, education, and adequate experience working with youth in school-based settings. Natalia has spent her time in college as a peer advocate for the CARE office on campus, spreading awareness about sexual violence prevention, education to college students, and served as an academic and social-emotional mentor to youth with City Year. She also volunteered as a crisis hotline operator with CASA, and lastly, an older youth leader with Think Together at Centinela High School. Natalia is proud to be the oldest sibling of 7 children, adores her 3 cats, and enjoys spending time outdoors. So please help me in welcoming our speakers for this panel, Sandy and Natalia.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction. I guess I have this, but I'll just do this one. All right, sounds good. All right, give me 1 second. Our presentation is not up. How's everyone doing post-lunch? I heard there was a dance party out there. I hope some people partook. Hope we're feeling energized. Nicole? No, where are the slides? No, so we have like a Google slideshow that I sent. No, they're not up here. All right, give us 1 second. Log into my Google account, but then everyone's going to see my whole thing. Okay. Okay.
Sorry, folks.
Sorry.
We're having a technical issue, but we should get some.
Yeah, I mean, the right thing though. Yeah. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Just close this.
Can everyone hear me?
Let's see.
How about now? Okay, so while we get our presentation up on the screen, we have an icebreaker that we want to do with you all. So since today's session is all about cultivating youth supports in violence prevention and supporting our youth, we all want you to think about your youth. Not that you're all old, you all have very youthful energy in here, but we want you all to think back to a time when you were a young person who was in need of some sort of support. What were some ways that adults made you feel supported? And I also want you to think about what are some things that adults could have done differently to make you feel supported. So we'll pass around some mics for folks who would like to participate. So again, think back to a time when you were in need of support as a young person. What were some ways that adults made you feel supported, or what are some things they could have done differently to better support you? Take a minute to reflect on this question. Whenever you're ready to share out, if you'd like, raise your hand so that we can pass the mic to you. Feel free to answer just one question or both questions, whatever you feel comfortable with. And thank you everyone for being patient. If not, we could just get started with our presentation.
Fun.
Yeah.
I heard some amazing questions earlier. I know someone has something they would like to share. Yeah. Thank you.
So again, think about a time when you were a young person who was in need of support. What were some ways that adults helped you to feel supported, or what are some things that they could have done differently to make you feel supported? Because I know sometimes adults might think they know everything, they know what youth are going through, but that's not always the case.
Yes, I saw a hand. We have a microphone coming to you. Thank you for volunteering.
Thank you. I'll be the one. I'll jump out and with both feet into the deep water. I would say growing up as a kid, I don't believe that my parents really supported me. Nothing special, just a regular kid growing up, but finding it very difficult to navigate through adolescence. But I think what they could have done better is just listened. Oftentimes adults, we talk over our children, we talk to them, we don't listen. And I think that that was one of the things that could have been more beneficial and could have maybe been preemptive on some missteps that I took as a youth. Now as a mother of 4 daughters, I'm making sure my ears are wide open, and I realize I have 2 ears and 1 mouth.
Thank you for sharing that. You make a really good point.
Give it up.
Listening to our youth. All right.
Yeah, one over here.
My name is Juan. With me growing up was the emotions. You know, I was told men don't cry at a young age, and really, I didn't know how to show my emotion. I was never pretty much, when I would cry, I would hide, so I couldn't show my emotion to my mother or my father. So one thing that I'm trying to change is like letting them cry and letting them go through an emotion, you know, because I'm barely learning how to go through my emotions, like, so it's kind of hard for me. But that's one thing that, like, growing up was something that I kind of was iffy about, you know.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that was awesome. Okay, one more. Now we're getting started.
So for me growing up, I'm the middle child, so my parents weren't always there for me, but what I had is the streets. So growing up in the streets, around the gang members that I was around, I saw what they were doing, but they were also telling me, continue school. You don't want this life. So that's what supported me as an adolescent and going into life, which now that I think back, my parents, I understand why they couldn't certain things because they had 4 kids to raise, which I still say that's actually the greatest thing that I went through in life.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone's responses.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for being open and vulnerable in the space. These are the type of activities that we do with youth, so I am giving you a heads up. We are going to be asking you some more questions. We're going to be asking you to engage with us, hopefully in some ways that maybe you might learn something that could benefit yourself or your work with youth. And we're really excited here today to talk about Generation J, which is Jenesse Center's youth-focused program, and really give you all a sense of the structure, techniques, and vision that we try to utilize in our work with youth. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Jenesse Center. Shout out Jenesse for being one of the co-sponsors of this event today, but I just wanted to give a little bit of background information for those who might not be as familiar. Jenesse Center, we are the oldest domestic violence intervention and prevention support program in South Los Angeles. We've been providing our life-saving services for over 40 years in that community and throughout Los Angeles. Jenesse Center was founded by a group of 5 Black women who were all survivors of domestic violence and had all had similar experiences going to try to seek services in their communities. And they found that there weren't really services available for them that were right where they lived. And when they went outside of their communities to try to find these services, those services didn't address the unique experiences that they had, not only as survivors, but also as Black women. And so they wanted to create a program that really kept this approach in mind, that everyone has a unique experience with violence based on the intersecting identities they hold and based on their background. Many of the things that Andrew was discussing earlier, right? We don't live single issue lives. And that was what the founders of Jenesse Center wanted to bring to domestic violence prevention. And so because of that, we're more than just a shelter for survivors of domestic violence. We're a family institute. We offer training and educational programs, services, and outreach efforts that are all designed to rebuild lives, restore autonomy, reunite families, and enrich our communities. And Generation J fits right into that.
So in today's session, we will address the various issues that youth may be experiencing in their lives that are relevant to today's discussion about how we want to better support our youth in regards to dating violence, domestic violence, and violence prevention. We will also share with you the teaching techniques that we use to engage our youth in conversations around relationship violence and how to build healthier relationships. We will also talk about the 4 main models that we use in our youth programming, and lastly, discuss our efforts in building youth leaders to become advocates in violence prevention. So we already went over our icebreaker, but this is usually how we start off our workshops with our youth. Usually the questions are fit to the central themes of what the workshop is about. But yeah, we loved hearing everyone's responses, and we're all here to talk about how we want to better support our youth in violence prevention.
Absolutely. And so moving into discussion of youth experiences, the purpose of this section, of course, we can't address all of the different types of experiences that youth may be having, but we wanted to highlight a few critical experiences that youth of all ages may be experiencing or going through, or things that impact the way that they come into our spaces and our programs, and things that we really want to keep in mind. So the first experience is not just an experience that youth go through. This was a global experience of the pandemic and the isolation that we all endured to various degrees. Of course, because this was a global phenomenon, we all had one commonality, right, of experiencing this global trauma. But the reason that we're discussing it today in relation with youth is because we know, because of the different developmental stages that youth of various ages were at, they had some unique experiences during this time that are important for us to take into account in our prevention work. So, of course, and I also want to say, of course, we're still dealing with the impacts of this, right? Just got my booster shot on Friday. I hope, everyone is maintaining their safety. But we're really talking about the height of the pandemic, right? And the drastic changes that had on the way we move through the world and daily life, right? And because of these drastic impacts to things like, in-person schooling, right? This is a critical place where youth are making interpersonal relationships. They're learning what social behaviors are appropriate and acceptable. They're building their sense of their identity and their self, right? That was taken away from them for an amount of time. Maybe they were, developing social dynamics and relationships through extracurricular activities, building community. All of these things are critical to, no matter what age youth are, if they're to their cognitive development, their social development, their emotional development. And so knowing that these formative experiences were stunted, particularly when we're doing our work talking about mental health, relationships, violence prevention, we have to really be considerate that these skills, we can't assume that they were developing in the same way as we were used to previously. So one study, which focused on the impact of COVID-19 on youth mental health, surveyed a group of youth that found negative impacts across 3 different areas of their lives, just to name some of them. And the proportion of youth that reported these negative impacts was consistent. So between 74.7 and 75.6% of youth reported negative impacts from the pandemic on their work or school life, their non-work life, and their mental health, right? So we can all, I think, relate to this, whatever our own experiences were, but just using that, we're keeping in mind, okay, maybe if youth aren't responding in a way that they have previously, right? How do we kind of keep this in mind as a factor to consider?
So youth are in very different stages of understanding who they are as individuals, in groups, and in the world as well. Many youth have their very unique experiences with their identity development, but we'll go over some major factors that can contribute to the way that youth view themselves interpersonally and also as members of society. So part of identity development is understanding who oneself is and also in relation to other social groups. It can become more complex when they move into other social dynamics, like in the school settings or in a work environment. These social dynamics further develop through increasingly complex peer relationships and an increased sensitivity to acceptance and rejection by their peers. Exploring gender and sexual identity is also a very normal part of a youth's identity development. Children as young as 2 years old already have a strong sense of what gender is, but as they get into their adolescence, when they're experiencing these physical changes to their body or going through puberty, for example, it can be normal for questions or curiosity to come up around their gender and sexuality. Some of these explorations can look like changes to their physical appearance, so changing their hairstyle, growing it out, cutting it. It could be changing the way that they dress themselves, right? Their gender expression. It could also look like going on hormone therapy and so many other things. And we also want to consider the fact that media plays a huge role and has a huge influence on the way that youth view themselves today. Youth are exposed to media everywhere that they go, whether it's outside and they see billboards, whether it's on their TV screens, on the magazines, and most commonly all over social media. These different forms of media display messages of what the norm should look like for these different social and interpersonal identities. So, as you can imagine, it could be very difficult for youth to understand who they are as individuals and in relation to other social groups and dynamic and as members of society when all of these factors play a huge role.
And this moves directly into our next section, and I think Andrew really touched on a lot of these factors in a great way. So piggybacking off of some of the things he talked about, but really diving deeper into the impact of gendered, cultural, and other social norms. Again, this is something that we all experience in our daily lives, right? No matter what our age is, no matter our background, we might have differing experiences based on the communities that we're a part of or the identities we hold. But we all experience these social expectations, these different pressures, these different norms. And particularly, as Natalia mentioned, right, we're looking at the impact of how these are translated through media. Whether it's advertisements, social media, other cultural products, we're constantly bombarded with messages about sex, dating, relationships, right? And if we're keeping in mind that youth are in this malleable state where they're still figuring out how do I relate to others? What kind of relationships do I want? How do I view sex? Those messages can often have negative or simplified ideas that can then impact how youth behave in relationships and how they expect others to respond. So up here, I have a screenshot of an Instagram post by the rapper Snoop Dogg. And we wanted to incorporate this because this is the type of cultural product that we use in our workshops with youth, right? We know that they're on Instagram all the time. We know that they're on TikTok. So we always are looking for various pieces of social media that we can embed in our presentations and use to forward the ideas that we're trying to discuss. So in this Instagram post, it's a picture of the rapper Gucci Mane and his wife Keisha Kaur. And this is them on their wedding day. To contextualize it, Snoop Dogg is posting this, and in the caption, he says, everybody wants this, right? He says, this is the ideal relationship. They're smiling, they look great. This is what we should all be striving for in our relationships. But throughout the caption, he goes on to talk about everyone forgets how she stayed in a relationship with him when he was incarcerated, when he was abusing drugs, when he was cheating on her, and basically puts forth this message that she is more deserving of this healthy, idealized version of the relationship that they have now because she endured these potentially negative or unhealthy behaviors, right? And this idea might sound familiar to some of y'all. It's this concept of a ride or die partner, right? Someone who goes through all the bad stuff with their partner, takes all of the painful things, and then when that partner reaches a place where they don't act in those ways anymore, that person is somehow more deserving of a healthy relationship. And again, everyone is different in a relationship, right? Everyone has the ability and should have the autonomy to make whatever choices they want to make if they want to remain in relationship with someone. But we don't want youth to equate the idea with, oh, I'll only have a healthy relationship if I endure these negative, potentially toxic, potentially unhealthy behaviors, right? And so by using something like an Instagram post to highlight this cultural norm, not only are we showing them, hey, you're getting these messages all the time, so this is something to keep an eye out for, but also moving forward the point that no one, should or has to remain in a relationship or endure these negative behaviors to have something healthy on the other end, right? Everyone has that autonomy and choice, and you can have a healthy relationship without having to endure that. And so now we're going to do another activity with you all. As I talked about, advertisements, are a big thing that we all receive different messages from, and something that we really like to utilize with youth since, they're seeing it on billboards, on their phones, in, I was going to say magazines, but I don't really think youth read that many magazines anymore. But these are something that we're all seeing, right? So we're going to do an activity that we actually do with middle school students with you all now. Up here, I have 2 advertisements. You can see them on the various screens around the room. And I know everyone is a little bit spread out, but with the people at your table, I want you to consider some questions and have a little discussion. So I want you to talk about, what do you see in these images? Who do you see? What is the aesthetic? What is it visually representing to you? I also want you to think about, what emotion do you think the advertiser wants you to feel in looking at this image? What message do you think they're trying to convey? And then this is kind of a little bonus one, but what product do you think they're actually selling if you don't already know what the product is? So, or what do you think they might be trying to sell you? What's the idea they're trying to sell you? So what do you see? Who do you see? What are the emotions do you think they want you to feel? And what's the actual product? Everyone good on that? All right, so take 2 minutes with the people sitting around you and share your thoughts, and we'll come back. Okay, I know there's a lot to say about these images, but wrap up what you're discussing. We could talk about these for the whole hour and 20 minutes, so I know there's a lot to say. All right, and we'd love to get one response from a table about what they discussed and what came up for them. If anyone would like to share.
Thank you. We were talking, someone mentioned that for the Miss Dior one, we're assuming it's a perfume or cologne that they're selling, but there's like, you can't see it in the ad. It's
Yeah,
very
we purposely
sexualized.
blocked it out.
Yeah, oh, okay. But we just noticed that both of them are very sexualized, and it's just, it doesn't really seem like it's, well, we don't really know what they were selling, but we just noticed it was very erotic, very sexualized. So yeah.
Were there any, I just want to ask you one follow-up. Were there any like differences in the messages of sexualization that you're noticing between the image on the left and the right?
I think definitely the second one with Noah Beck is like breaking those gender norms because of the heels, which you don't really see often. Yeah. And the first one just seems like a regular ad with a woman, you know, showing off her body. Like
More stereotypical images of femininity versus maybe pushing the ideas of gender norms around masculinity. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I wish we could take more answers. Like I said, typically we do this as a whole hour-long workshop with the youth, so I know there's a lot to say. But I think you really highlighted some important points, right? We all have an understanding that advertisers utilize sex and sexuality to market anything, whether it's food or alcohol or, you know, Airbnb, really anything you can think of, even if it has nothing to do with that. And by asking students, you know, they might be, like what you said, it's just a normal advertisement, right? And so rather than, we try to break students out of that possible desensitization by saying, have a critical eye when you're looking at these images. What do you notice, in the hope that they'll be able to kind of maintain that critical eye as they're moving throughout the world, and be mindful of these messages that they're receiving.
So bullying affects everyone, whether someone is a victim, a perpetrator, or bystander to it. Unfortunately, this is something that many youth experience in their lives. And I think when we're talking about violence prevention in youth, we also have to think about the fact that bullying just doesn't happen in school settings. It also happens outside of school settings, like within the household or on a line as well. We need to also think of bullying as a form of violence. So when we're talking about violence prevention, bullying is a very important issue to discuss. So I'll share some stats about bullying. So 2.7 million students are bullied each year. And on the other hand, 2.1 million students bully each year. So what are the effects of bullying on youth? We'll talk about these effects in two different ways. We'll talk about how these affects kids who are bullied and also kids who bully others. So kids who are bullied can experience negative physical, academic, and mental health issues. They're more likely to experience depression and anxiety, have various health complaints, or also perform poorly in school and have low attendance. On the other hand, kids who bully others are more likely to engage in various risky and violent behaviors well into their adulthood. This could look like abusing substances as adolescents and as adults as well. This could look like getting into fights, vandalizing property, dropping out of school, or possibly becoming violent towards their romantic partners, spouses, or children as adults. And like I mentioned, if we want to talk about violence prevention and bullying, this is not something that just happens in schools by other kids their age. It's also a reality that this happens in the workplace, outside in the households, and also online. Which leads me to our next topic about how technology plays an important role in the way that we talk about relationship violence among youth. We know that technology and media is very a big impact and has a huge role in the way that youth view their relationships. And yeah. So I'll start with some stats about technology and youth. 1.2 million teens are subjected to extreme cyberbullying on a daily basis. And 19% of teens say that their partner has used a cell phone to spread rumors about them. So when we're talking about violence prevention and relationship violence among youth, we have to talk about how those forms of violence can take place through the use of technology. So for example, cyberbullying and digital abuse. This can look like online stalking. It could be constantly messaging and blowing up your phone. It could be posting pictures online without someone's consent, or posting mean and hurtful comments online about someone else. Digital dating abuse takes the same forms as cyberbullying and digital abuse, but this is more about someone gaining power and control over their romantic partner or someone they are in a relationship with. So this might look like stealing or demanding your passwords. It could be telling who your partner can or cannot be friends with. It could be constantly looking through your phone without your permission, and so many other things. And since many of us here work with youth, it's important that we know how to recognize the signs of a youth who is experiencing digital dating abuse. And some of those signs may look like a sudden lack of posting. So if you know this is a youth who's, pretty active on social media and suddenly they're just not posting anymore, there could be something going on that we don't know about. Some other signs include like refusing to give their phone to you or let someone else look through it. This can also look like a withdrawal from their normal social activities, or if you notice that they start to become upset, sad, or angry after using their phone. These are all different signs that we could look out for that might indicate there are some experiences with digital dating abuse. And like I said, we can't really limit the impact that technology has on our youth, but what we can do is encourage them to use it in a safe and healthier way.
Awesome. And of course, in our discussion today, all of us either coming from a healthcare background or a domestic violence and relationship violence prevention background or intervention, we obviously have to discuss how relationship and sexual violence are experienced by youth. And we know that there are some similarities in the way that youth experience this to the ways that adults experience it. One of those unfortunate similarities is that it is widespread and very common, yet vastly underreported. And so knowing when we go into spaces, youth may not be disclosing experiences of relationship violence or sexual violence. They may not be even aware that they've had experiences that can fall into that. But moving into all spaces with youth, with that assumption that there may be some experiences of violence there. And so we have to act in a way that is human-centered, trauma-informed, and really speaks to those potential survivors. Another similarity and basis between how adults experience IPV and youth is that it is always based in a pattern of behaviors where one partner or potentially multiple partners are working to exert power and control over another partner or partners. But oftentimes the ways that youth exert that power and control and the specific behaviors that they utilize are going to look different for youth, right? Because they move through different spaces. They have different behaviors that are more common to them. So up here on this side of the screen, I have a power and control wheel. I'm sure most of y'all who are involved in DV prevention are very familiar with them. They're an amazing tool. And this one specifically is for teens, right? So it highlights some specific behaviors that teens will utilize in violent relationships. And again, these behaviors can take different forms for adults. But one thing is like using social status, right? students and youth have very specific social hierarchies, dynamics of relationships. We can think about, popularity, social rejection. That's something that we, can all be impacted by, but can be particularly poignant for youth. And so that's a behavior that can be utilized in a violent relationship, right? Spreading rumors about someone, ruining their reputation, turning friends against them, right? And isolating them. And I wanted to pose some questions to you all that we actually utilize with students themselves to talk about the nuances of how youth experience relationship and sexual violence. And so the first question is, why might it be harder for youth to leave an abusive relationship? And I'd love to hear from someone in the audience, from one person. Why might it be more difficult? I saw a hand over here, or whichever hand. We have another question, sorry.
Thank you. Vanessa Ramos with Disability Rights California. My pronouns are she, and in Spanish, ella. I wanted to uplift immigration status as a way to bring that to the forefront of our minds, because I know that there's some very common things that we can speak to, but I was very shocked to hear by my high school-year-old ninth grader who attends Squat Fairfax High. She was sharing that one of her classmates is in a domestic violence, interpersonal violent relationship, and that she's scared to leave her partner because her family's undocumented and the partner has
legal status. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That is incredibly common. Of course, I think oftentimes we think of that as happening in adult violent relationships, but can definitely happen with youth as well. And I think speaks overall to the use of privilege as a behavior that can make it oftentimes difficult for youth to leave an abusive relationship. Thank you for sharing that. So now I want to ask, what are some possible factors that you think contribute to youth perpetrating violence in a relationship? Are there, and I'm sorry, we can't take another example right now for this one. I appreciate it though. So what are some things that you think could potentially contribute or influence youth to maybe act in violent ways? Any factors? Oh, okay.
I would argue that a lot of times the aggression of certain youth comes from the need to express control by dominating another person. And then I've also found as an instructor that that same kind of aggression allows certain boys to gain popularity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Again, this relates to this idea of using social status, right? Maybe someone uses their popularity to exert power over another, but they also could be attempting to gain that power as a way to gain social status, right? To gain popularity in a group. Maybe if that's the normal behavior of a certain group at a school or a certain friend group, right? If they see that as the example, then they'll go with that. And there's lots of other factors, right? Maybe there are models of abuse in a youth's home or in their community. Maybe there are certain stereotypical ideas that they're given about what it means to be in a relationship, depending on their gender identity. The point that you shared earlier, if you're not able to express your emotions because you think that's not available to you depending on how you identify or how you present, maybe those emotions don't know where to go, and that can sometimes manifest as violence. Of course, none of this is to mitigate someone's responsibility in perpetrating an act of violence, but if we really look at what are the challenges and the barriers that young survivors face and how we address those, but also looking at what are things that might contribute to violence? So how can we work to address those before violence occurs? Thank you all for sharing. I know we could keep talking about this for a long time. I want to be cognizant of timing as well.
Awesome. So we just addressed some of the various issues that youth experience in their lives. We will now share with you our teaching techniques that we utilize to engage youth in conversations around violence prevention. And those techniques include student-led learning, self-reflection, and inquiry-based learning. So for student-led learning, this requires that students act as active participants in the space as co-teachers. So what this means is they are learning from their own and others' experiences, questions, and ideas. We really want to uplift their personal experiences and ideas. So for example, in our Friends Over Frenemies conflict resolution training that we facilitated with our middle school students, we asked them to think of a time when a classmate was a good friend to them. What did they do and how did it make you feel? Or to also think about a time of how they were a good friend to a classmate. What did you do and how did they feel? And so by asking them this question, it allows them to start thinking about friendships in their own ways. What do they think is a positive and healthy behaviors that translate into friendships, and they think about this on their own accord. Another aspect to student-led learning is self-directed training topics and activities. So with workshops that are sponsored by our student groups, we're basically just asking them, what is it that they need? What do they want to learn about? What are some topics that are relevant to them? When they do this, they are participating in the way and sharing information on how we can guide our learning materials that it best fits their needs. Their participation also plays a role into planning activities with professional and on-campus staff as well. And all of this plays into the training that we eventually will use with our younger students. So this might look like expanding on more information on certain topics or engaging, the length of certain activities. So for example, we use this online learning platform called Nearpod. We used it with our middle school group of students. They really expressed that they liked learning with Nearpod, and so we took their feedback and were able to continue to use that platform in upcoming workshops that we had planned with them. By giving them the option to let us know what they need, they're given a direct hand in telling us how they need to learn best. And it also just builds excitement around in general to learn about these certain topics related to relationship violence. And lastly, giving example language and behaviors. So in our Breaking It Down, Boundaries and Relationships training that was facilitated for our college students, this workshop was about how do we understand our boundaries and how do we assert those boundaries. So on this slide, as you can see, we have a couple of phrases that youth can use to assert their boundaries. For example, I respect your beliefs and values, but I do not share them. Or it could look like, I need time to think about that. By giving them this direct language, we're giving them the tools to practice these skills outside of the classroom and to also potentially continue to teach those around them, like their friends, their family, and their peers.
Awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of our techniques, I was super excited when I heard Andrew talking about viewing students as partners, because that's really how we approach our work on every level, right? Making sure that they're involved from the creation of the curriculum, even from informing what the curriculum is about, through the activities, through getting data and hearing their evaluations of the curriculum after and building upon that. So it made me super happy to hear that, and I'm sure you'll hear a lot of those ideas reflected throughout this. The next principle that we utilize as a framing technique is self-reflection. And again, this is similar to the ethos of student-led learning in that a core belief that we have is that by developing self-knowledge, sorry, I'm trying to find the right angle of this mic. By developing self-knowledge, students will be better equipped to navigate relationships with others, right? that applies for all of us too as adults. We can never, have too much knowledge about ourselves and never stop learning about ourselves. And self-reflection takes form through two main types of activities in our workshops. The first is through activities where we ask students to consider their needs, wants, boundaries, and expectations, and how they would apply these following the workshop. So an example activity we do with middle schoolers and younger students is listing different characteristics or behaviors in relationships and asking them from their point of view if they would rate them as very important, somewhat important, or not important. So statements like, it is important to me that the person I am dating tells me if someone tried to flirt with them. Y'all don't even know the commotion that comes up when we ask that question. Or things like, it is important to me that the person I am dating and I spend more time together than apart. And we ask students to share, what comes up for them. How did you come to this place? And by asking them about these preferences, we're really showing them that part of being in relationship is knowing yourself, right? Knowing what your needs are and having the ability to communicate that to others. And because we ask students to share this, there's oftentimes a lot of dialogue and discussion about who's right and what you should do. And we use that discussion to make the point as well that everyone has different preferences and needs, and that's something that students are going to have to navigate when they're in relationships. And that's a normal thing and not something that, we should try to convince others to feel the same way that we do or see that as a disadvantage. And the next way, or another way, that we incorporate self-reflection is by introducing subject matter to students by having them examine the impact of an unknown concept in their own life. So the way that this looks is, we know in our work that oftentimes we may be using language or sharing information that students are not familiar with. An example of this in a workshop for college students about understanding the physical, emotional, and behavioral impacts of trauma, we introduced them to this concept of the window of tolerance, which really talks about the space that we're all in where we're able to effectively cope with and manage stressors, and how this window is often diminished by singular or repeated experiences of trauma. We know that this topic and this way of wording it might not be familiar to students, but following this workshop, we asked them to draw what it might look or feel like for them to be out of that window of tolerance. So they have to reflect back on, okay, I just learned this new information. How has that come up in my life before this? How can I connect this information to a personal experience that I've already had? And by asking them to make those connections and utilize that self-reflection, we strengthen their knowledge of that core concept and also hopefully make it something that they can utilize more freely in the future. We were going to have you all do a drawing activity, but we are a little bit short on time today, so that's something you can do on your own time if you like. We'll make sure to share the slides.
And so for our last approach to engaging youth around conversation on violence prevention, we use the inquiry-based learning technique, which is a learning process that engages students by making real-world connections through explorations and high-level questioning. So we really just want them to practice their problem-solving skills and experiential learning. And so we'll demonstrate this technique with our activity that we do with our middle school students, and it's called Talking About Toxicity. So I will read the statements that are on the screen. You will label it either healthy, unhealthy, or abusive, and then just raise your hand for whatever you think that category falls with. Okay? So every time Alex tells Jay good news about their life, Jay points out something negative about it. So every time Alex tells Jay good news about their life, Jay points out something negative about it. So, does anyone think that this is healthy? Raise your hand if you think so. Okay, does anyone think this is unhealthy? Okay, we have a couple of hands. Does anyone think this is an abusive behavior? Okay, a few. Okay, awesome. We will get into discussion after our second statement. So our next statement is, Sam often finds out that Angel doesn't invite them to hang out with the rest of their other friends. So Sam often finds out that Angel doesn't invite them to hang out with the rest of their other friends. So does anyone think this is healthy? Okay, raise your hand if you think this is unhealthy. Okay, does anyone think this is an abusive behavior? Raise your hand. Okay, so I'd love to hear from maybe one person to share about any of these statements. What did you choose for the behavior and why? Yes. Yeah, so we just want to know, do you think this is unhealthy, healthy? Yeah. Okay.
It's okay that Sam finds out that him with the other friends. That's perfectly a healthy, normal thing. With their friend and it's not their friend. It's dangerous, I think, sometimes. Abusive and toxic when we're talking about it, because that statement.
Yeah, so a lot of our statements are intended to be very general and vague so that we can get students to really think about these situations, right? You said that this could be healthy, right? Sometimes friends just want to be apart from their other friends. They all have the right to hang out with whoever they want, right? Some might think this may be unhealthy just because there's a lack of communication, right? So we want to ask these questions to our students so that we can engage in conversation about the nuances of these behaviors, right? We want them to think, okay, is this healthy, unhealthy? We need more information about these statements. And usually when we're coming up with these examples that you see on the screen, we want to make it as relevant to situations that youth will experience or have experienced, right? Because we really want them to practice their problem-solving skills, their critical thinking skills, so that they can learn to think before they act on reaction and impulse. And so now we'll get into our programming models that we use for our youth program Generation J. These include outreach activities, school-based programming, client-integrated programs, and community-based events and partnerships. So our outreach activities can look like tabling at on-campus and off-campus. So for our on-campus tabling activities, this includes attending community service fairs or month-long campaign events. So at these tabling events, what we normally do, we share our work with students. We let them know who we are and how they can become involved with us. We also share Jenesse as an intervention and prevention resource. And of course, we share any volunteer opportunities that students might be interested in. And for our off-campus tabling events, this looks like going to community events. We just attended the Taste of Soul Festival this past weekend, where we were able to talk to over thousands of community members about Jenesse as a resource. We also shared information on how youth can become involved with us, and we passed out any essential items that community members might need.
Awesome. And of course, when we're talking about working with youth, the majority of our programming does occur on school campuses or in partnerships with schools, since we know that that's a great way to access youth in various parts of the community. And when we're approaching school-based programming, our question is always, what are the systems or structures that are already in place at this school that are working towards prevention, and how do we support those efforts through collaboration? Or, schools that maybe don't have efforts in place, what is their vision? What are their goals? And how do we help those goals materialize through our collaboration? And the programming, of course, looks different depending on the level of school and each individual school, since every collaboration we have with a school is unique, since every school is unique. Our programs with colleges and universities, we typically work either with student groups that could look like a club, a Greek organization, a sports team, and oftentimes individual students as well who are interested in doing service-related projects. But we also work with various on-campus offices. This includes Title IX offices, prevention offices, like the CARE offices. I know there's one at UCLA, UC Riverside, wellness and student health offices. Again, really just looking at whatever offices are already offering services similar that we can complement what they're doing. And the programs on colleges and universities, it can look like educational workshops and trainings. We do healing focused and survivor specific events. We do lots of creative activities, awareness month campaigns, as well as service projects. And we're currently partnered with offices on the campuses of UCLA, USC, LMU, Mount St. Mary's University, Occidental College, Pasadena City College, East Los Angeles College, Santa Monica College, and we will actually be beginning a partnership this upcoming semester with an out-of-state school at University of Missouri. For high school programming, thank you. Yeah, if any of you are connected to college and universities, please come talk to me after this. I would love to expand our efforts. Our high school programming, similarly, oftentimes we're working with individual teachers, offices of community service, counselors, and administrators and principals. This often looks like educational workshops that we'll do for an entire grade level over the course of multiple weeks, or it can look like after-school clubs and listening sessions, our youth council, which Natalia will discuss in a little bit, as well as service-focused projects. And some of the current schools that we partner with are Harvard Westlake, Loyola High School, Archer, Immaculate Heart, St. Mary's, Augustus Hawkins, Centennial High School, and Locke High School. And then for middle schools, again, working typically with administrators, teachers, but also sometimes with parents and parent-focused groups, since we know that parents are often a little bit more involved with younger students. And we do educational workshops for students and parents as well. And right now we're partnered with St. Odelia, Crozier Middle School, and 99th Street Elementary, which is an elementary school. And a big part of our school-based programming is also integrating students with client-based programs, right? So how do students support the work that Jenesse does on an intervention level? This can look like students collaborating with us on projects for our clients. We do a 4-week summer camp for our youth residential clients, and we always have college and high school students volunteer and support that program. We also do other focused programs with groups of volunteers, like our Jenesse Parents and Children program, which works to empower and connect our clients and their children. And we always have student groups who are doing service projects, donation drives, and really just supporting the work that Jenesse does on an intervention level as well. And of course, we've talked a lot throughout this, our work is always collaborative, right? We could not do any of this without the partnerships we build with community-based organizations, community members, schools, really all of you here too as stakeholders, right? We know that this work always happens in collaboration. Our community-based events typically take a few different forms. One of those forms is holistic healing activities. So the focus of these events is to address youth that we might not be reaching through our school-based programming, right? And expanding that reach. And when we're doing these healing activities, we're really working to introduce youth to healing practices that they might not have had access to before, whether it's through cultural barriers, financial resources, geographic location, all of those different things. So previous events that we've done included the We Are Who We Are group mural event, where we brought youth together to create a group mural and talk about self-identity and self-determination. We did Our Bodies and Ourselves, which was a trauma-informed healing event, and we introduced students to trauma-informed yoga practice, as well as knowledge about how they can utilize various plants to support healing, and really focus on how do you create a positive relationship with yourself. And we've done other events. We did the All About Love poetry workshop. This was a Pride Month event that we did in collaboration with a local poet, where youth did poetry and writing exercises talking about how they conceptualize love, how they feel love, and how we can create spaces of love in the community. We also do our youth symposiums. These are events where we bring together youth, parents, community stakeholders, other partners, and we discuss the topics that are most relevant to youth. We've done these virtually and in person. Up here are 2 examples of our flyers, and we will be doing another one in February, so keep an eye out for that.
So, Raise Your Voice for Peace is a youth vocal singing competition for children and youth ages 13 to 18 years old. They can sing an original song or a cover of a song that has a positive and uplifting message. Raise Your Voice for Peace is a signature Generation J program and fundraiser to help maintain healthy relationships among youth. Raise Your Voice for Peace just celebrated its 5th annual competition earlier this May. We started back in 2018, and we'll play this clip of our... No, okay.
No, sorry.
We won't.
We're running low on time, so we're not going to watch this clip, but you can look it up on YouTube.
Yeah. Okay, so now we'll get into how we cultivate our youth leaders to become advocates in violence prevention. One way we do that is through our youth council. So youth council trains the next generation of violence prevention advocates. Youth council consists of high school students that all share a passion to become advocates for peace and social change. Participants go through a certified training in violence prevention advocacy. They also participate a lot in providing feedback on how to maintain the information and program as relevant to youth in today's society. This can also look like different efforts like creating workshops on their school campuses so that they can also become peer educators to those in their school communities. This also looks like having a presence on our social media page, right? Starting social media campaigns or engaging with youth across different platforms to share information on how to build healthier relationships. And this can also look like volunteering at our community events as well.
Awesome. So another way that we work to build youth leadership is through our paid internship program. This is a relatively new program, but in working with college and university students, we saw that there were a lot of students already doing this work on their campuses, whether they were peer advocates and educators, or they had gone through leadership training around violence prevention. And we really wanted to create a space where not only could they, take that knowledge that they had gained on campus and use it to support Jenesse, but also they could get a deeper understanding of how a domestic violence intervention and prevention program works. Through this program, we have students help create curriculum that we utilize with workshops. They go through our data and our surveys and help with our evaluation efforts to make our program as effective as it can be. And they really get a deeper knowledge of what are the practices that we're using every day in prevention work, and also hopefully expose them to careers in domestic violence intervention, prevention, and create that next generation of advocates. We also do a lot of student-initiated programs. Natalia touched on this with our younger students and our high schoolers. This also looks like sometimes I'll have individual students on college campuses who have an idea for a workshop and don't know what to do with that idea, right? I had a student at LMU who was chose Jenesse to do a community service project, and he had seen this documentary that touched on the impacts of technology and social media on interpersonal relationships and violence, and he was like, I think this is something people need to see. So I worked with him to create a screening and discussion event on the LMU campus. We came up with discussion questions. He went through all the logistics, and he facilitated this event with our support that was attended by over 50 students, right? An event that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the students' one idea. And he didn't really know where to go on campus to make that idea happen. So we were able to come in and help create that space. So it's really just about, again, what do students want? What do they need on campus? And how do we support those efforts? And all of this really just translates into Generation J's mission and vision. We are seeking to produce and uplift. I don't think we're producing them. I think they're already there. We're just there to help uplift and support them. But this next generation of morally conscious leaders who advocate for social change and work to create a culture without violence.
And we know that dating violence does not discriminate. So this is why we work to equip our youth with the knowledge and skills necessary to navigate their interpersonal relationships, utilize healthy behaviors, and also take a stand against dating violence in their community.
Awesome. So we're so appreciative you all for listening to this session. I know post-lunch can be kind of tough sometimes. We have about 5 minutes for questions, and then we'll be moving into a break. So if you can't get to your question, of course you can write it on a card, or Natalia and myself will also be around. We'd be happy to talk to you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, and we will make sure everyone gets these slides. Our contact information is also on here. If you think of a question later or you have an opportunity to partner, please feel free to reach out to us. Oh, question, yeah. So typically the curriculum that we create, again, like I said, because this is all done with the very specific needs in mind of our partners. It's usually very specified to the student group or the school that we're working with. We definitely have some curriculum resources available that we can share. It's not stored in any public place. It's all on my Google Drive. So you can definitely email me if you have questions about curriculum and resources. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your break.
We want to thank our sponsors, the Blue Shield of California Foundation and the National Health Resource Center on Domestic Violence.